So hi guys, I'm bardOZ. I have 20 years of experience playing FPS games and I have a few top Kovaak scores, especially in static dots. You might have seen me on the leaderboards of 1 world 6 targets small or 1 world 6 targets TE. So I'm making this video because I've promised many times now that I would have made a video explaining how I got this good at static dots. So first of all, I want to start with why are static dots even useful? Why would you waste time trying to improve at static dots? Well, of course, you wouldn't do it just for the static dots themselves, but you would do it because static dots kind of translate to some kind of aiming that you often use in games, which is basically flicks to a stationary point. For example, in a competitive tactical FPS like Counter-Strike or Valorant, you would use that kind of movement to move your cursor between places. That's what people usually call cursor placement, but if you're standing still and you hear a step and you need to move your cursor somewhere else, you would do it with basically a static movement. And you need to be quick and accurate, because if you're slow, well, then you risk someone running in outside of the corner before you actually have your cursor in the right position. And if you're not accurate, then you risk flicking to the corner when you hear them, and then maybe you will be slightly off and they come out and your cursor is not in the right place and you will have to flick again, which of course lowers your chances of winning the fight. So that's why you should be playing static dots basically when it comes to Kovaaks and FPS aim trainers. So now let's discuss how I managed to improve. So first of all, you have to keep in mind that my scores are extremely high right now, but I kind of started high because of the years of experience that I had in FPS games before I started playing Kovaaks. Because basically when I started playing static dots in Kovaaks, I already had 13 years of experience in Counter-Strike, so don't feel demotivated if you can't hit the kind of scores that I'm hitting, because you gotta keep it in context that I had played similar scenarios in Counter-Strike for years before I even ever touched Kovaaks. But apart from that, basically I used to be around 1200 in 1 world 6 targets mode when I started practicing. So yes, it was not bad considering I had just started, but it wasn't terrible either. And I was kind of stuck. Like, don't think that my improvement was linear, because it wasn't. I will put a little graph of my scores on screen to show you. And so, of course, how did I improve? So basically everyone was telling me in Voltaic and in aiming communities that I should have gone for speed, but I felt like that wasn't the right way, because my idea is, why would you go for speed over accuracy when the perfect run has 100% accuracy? Like, basically I approached it like you would approach learning an instrument, because my idea was I need to be able to make the movement that I need perfectly and slowly before I speed up. So I actually started getting lower scores but higher accuracy. I kind of forced myself to slow down and make sure that I was 100% on target. Now, initially I was using the same cursor that I use in Valorant, which has a gap in the middle, and basically I was focusing very hard in the middle of the cursor and only clicking if I was 100% sure that it was black in the middle, because I use black dots. So basically I started getting 100% accuracy over and over again, and scores at the start dipped and then they started climbing again. The problem with this is that you need to basically power through a period of time where you will get lower scores than what you were getting, but that's basically because you're unlearning bad habits that you had when going too fast. Also, you need to understand that the way you should approach flicking and static dots is not actually one smooth movement, because that will, if you're going very fast, that will be very, very hard to actually consistently hit on target if you move like that, or it will just keep you slow. The idea is to actually make a very fast flick as fast as you can with your arm, and then you will land somewhere close to the dot, possibly even on the dot once you get very good, and then you have to wait for your brain to realize where you landed, or kind of predict where you're gonna land based on the movement depending on how good you are, and then micro-correct. Micro-correction means that you're basically flicking again, but on a very, very, very small angle, so it's not really a flick, because it would be just a little movement of the hand, and then you land on the dot. That's the idea. So you split into movements, but like at the start you can go extremely fast on the flick but take your time with the micro correction, okay? Because I see people trying to ape, people call it ape, which means basically acting like an ape, moving extremely fast. And you can still ape and be accurate, you know, you just ape the flick part of the movement and not the micro correction one. So you flick extremely fast, then you judge how far you are from target and you micro correct. Initially you will be very off, and eventually you will improve if you really focus on having clean lines. When I say clean lines, I mean try to basically be as close as possible to the target with your initial flick. That's the idea. So flick, almost land on target, and you know, if you're having trouble with this, slow down a bit, okay? Still try to be fast on the flick and slower on the micro correction, but slow down your whole game for a bit. And I would say consciously try to under flick. That also helps a lot, rather than over flicking, because then you're still, you know, maximizing the efficiency of the amount of movement you make. And by this I mean, if I under flick and then I micro correct the rest of the movement, the total movement that I made will be lower than if I over flicked and came back, which means that I can allow myself to go a tiny bit slower and still be at the same speed overall when it comes to kills per second, because now your lines are more efficient, you know? Because if you constantly overflick, you will be moving way more centimeters on the pad than someone that constantly underflicks. So that also helps, because then you're maximizing the efficiency of your movements, which is, you know, needed if you're going for a very, very high score. So something I'd say is very important is, like, originally when I started getting into the aiming community, a lot of people told me to try to use a metronome to get used to a faster pace. I actually think that's a very bad idea, because when it comes to static movements, both in game and in Kovaaks, you actually want to be dynamic in your pace. You want to be able to speed up when you're making small movements. Basically, when you have got clusters, for example, in 1v6 target small, you want to have a way faster pace than when you're moving between further away dots. So when you use a metronome, your brain will try to match the pace, and that will actually slow you down in clusters and make you go too fast on faraway dots, and it will just basically make you miss the faraway dots and waste efficiency in the clusters. So maybe you could experiment with a metronome with a way higher BPM than what you're actually capable of, and try to only match it for a period of time. But I would still say don't use it. I've basically never used it, and you know, I managed somehow to get to the top. So it's definitely not needed, okay? Now, something else I want to say is I think you should use smaller scenarios, smaller versions of the scenarios, like the 30% smaller versions of 1v6 target small and 1v4 target small. But you know, you shouldn't only play those, because the problem with those is that you will inevitably go slower, and so you won't get used to the faster pace that you need for the actual main scenarios. So use them, but still, you know, keep in mind what I said earlier. Split the movement in two parts. A flick that is very fast, and it should be fast even on the small ones, and then take your time with the micro correction. But it will be a lot easier to hit the micro correction because you will already have flicked close to the dot. So that is very good in my opinion. Use the smaller scenarios, but still try to go as fast as you would on the main one. Of course, you will slow down a lot more in the micro corrections, but they will be fine. So, final considerations on this. First of all, ask yourself, why am I going to grind small dots? Just for the score? I mean, that is a legitimate reason. I did it because I had fun with a competitive part of Kovaaks and the leaderboards. So, you know, it's okay. But if you're doing it to improve at games, then you should consider actually playing the game. That is a lot more efficient than actually grinding small dots. So of course, ideally you want to have a routine where you do use small dots, but only as part of the routine.